Hello and welcome. This is Plan, Do, Study Act by Erica Anderson. The first thing you're probably wondering is what is the Plan, Do, Study Act, or PDSA? The Plan, Do, Study Act is broken down into 4 steps, starting with Plan, which is to identify the problems, set measurable objectives, develop a plan, and predict outcomes. The next step is Do. This is where we execute the plan that we just set, but on a small scale. Document any observations, and then adapt for real life. Then Study. We take all the data and observations we've gathered, and we identify trends and patterns. And then we assess any impacts that it may have had. Following that is Act, where we decide on the next steps, we standardize improvements, and plan for continuous improvement. It ends up being a cycle. So the first part in my assessment is the plan, starting with the objective, to understand and apply Newton's laws of motion in order to analyze and describe the motion of the objects. The criteria is going to be knowledge and understanding, demonstrates a clear understanding of Newton's laws, including their statements and significance, applies the laws correctly to analyze and explain various motion scenarios, and describes the relationship between force, mass, and acceleration. Application and problem solving. They'll be able to apply Newton's laws to solve problems and analyze real-world situations, and show the ability to identify and analyze the forces acting on said objects and predict their resulting motion afterwards. Critical thinking and analysis, also in planning, continued. This analyzes and evaluates the application of Newton's laws of motion in different scenarios, and that can be in many different situations in real life, such as a car on the road, or walking, or in sports, or getting up in the morning to shut off an alarm. Any form of motion involves Newton's laws of motion, and it's important for the students to understand this. They'll be able to identify and explain any limitations of the laws, and be able to formulate logical connections between the laws and anything they've seen in the real world. Communication and explanation. They'll be able to communicate the concepts related to the laws of motion clearly and effectively. They'll use the right terminology such as acceleration, force, mass. They'll provide well-structured explanations with reasoning when applying the laws. And they will use visual aids, diagrams, and graphs to help bring clarity and understanding to each explanation. This will better give me an understanding of if they understand it, are they achieving the objective, and are they understanding it at a deeper level. So what's the setting going to be like for my assessment? It's going to be 8th grade with about 22 students in a class, and the demographics are going to come from Springfield, Mass, where the majority of the students are Black or African American. The impact of this assessment is to hopefully encourage deeper understanding. A lot of the students are often interested in cars during this age, so I often bring in different styles of cars and models that might interest the students, and they have to analyze those colors and compare them to Newton's laws. This helps enhance problem-solving skills and bringing real-world examples to life. It'll also promote critical thinking skills. Who will be conducting and using this assessment? Well, the students will be taking it. I will be conducting and using it to gather data. The assessment will consist of questions and tasks that evaluate knowledge, application, critical thinking, and communication related to Newton's laws of motion. Where are they going to be doing this? In school, and when? During class. So the do is actually creating the assessment, actually doing it, and having the students complete it. So we're going to switch over to a different document, and I'm going to show you my student or learner-centered assessment. Let me recenter us here. There we go. So here we have my assessment on Newton's laws of motion. Okay, so in this assessment, the students will be able to demonstrate their understanding and application of Newton's laws by completing the following tasks. The students will be sure to read each task carefully and provide the response based on their knowledge, comprehension of the topic. The first task is a real-world application where they will answer via an open response. This is where students will tie in those interests such as sports, cars, or other real-world things that they do every day. The second task is a problem-solving task. This is more of a written response where they will more calculate and demonstrate Newton's second law, which is force equals mass times acceleration. So they will tie that in and demonstrate how they can calculate. Third task is critical thinking. Okay, this is a short essay response. It helps them discuss any limitations or expectations of Newton's laws, and that not everything is perfect, but what can they see that might make Newton's laws more difficult or challenging to demonstrate. Lastly, the students will reflect on what they've learned through this and what they've learned with Newton's laws of motion into their own life. And last part is they will see their evaluation criteria. We're going to switch on back to the PowerPoint and we're going to continue on. Let me readjust us. Oops. Grab the wrong thing. Grab the wrong thing again. There we go. Let's continue. So the study part of the PDSA cycle is how will I analyze this data? Well, the ways that I'll do this is based on a rubric, and following that is qualitative analysis. The qualitative analysis will be reading and reviewing the open-ended and essay responses to gain insight into student understanding, depth of knowledge, and ability to apply Newton's laws of motion. I'll be looking for evidence of critical thinking, connections made to real life, and thoughtful reflection throughout their work. Throughout this, I'll also identify patterns and trends within the data. How will I know if the assessment provided the intended benefits for the student? Well, I'd start by looking at my objective that I started with, and I'd compare how the students did with the learning objectives. Did they achieve it? Did they reach their learning outcomes? Did they achieve what I expected and set for them? And then I'd also like to see what my students' feedback is. I want their opinion. I want to know what they thought. How will I intervene if a student does not achieve the intended results? Well, we all know that not everybody is perfect. This is very human life. So how can I as a teacher intervene? I'd start with individualized support. I'd be happy to offer tutoring, one-on-one help, even within class, sit with them, work with them, guide them as much as I can. If more support is needed, I will then issue tutoring and hopefully work with them a little bit more with less of a distraction from the class. If I'm finding that a lot of students are struggling, I may just do a reteach day where I simply reteach the topic and provide different scenarios and different ways of understanding it if the first time was not understandable by the students. I will also just regularly monitor the students' work because obviously sometimes students don't often achieve the intended results because they're not using their time wisely. So it's important to make sure each student is working diligently and using their time as effectively as possible. This will help students achieve those intended results. And lastly, what would cause me to revise the assessment in the ACT stage of the PDSA cycle? Well, first thing that would cause me to revise the assessment is if there was a misalignment with the learning objectives, meaning students were not grasping what they needed to. There was a lack of clarity from the students. They weren't understanding the task at hand, or they weren't understanding the topic at hand. And also feedback from the students. If a lot of the feedback from the students is negative, well, obviously that is not going to be an assessment that is effective if a lot of students feel that way. So that is when I need to jump in and I need to revise this assessment to better aid my students. Following that, using the assessment in a cycle. All right, this is where teachers often forget, is that when you make the assessment, you have to make the revisions and then you reuse it and you jump back in with the changes. So following all of this and following the PDSA cycle, I will then reflect, analyze, adjust the assessment. I will reincorporate the assessment, and I will then re-evaluate the data again. And if the assessment turns out to be better, then I will keep it and make littler adjustments. If it turns out to be another flop, well, that is when I need to remember, I need to reflect and make changes as well. So, in conclusion, learner-centered assessments are designed to prioritize students' needs, engagement, and active participation in the learning process. Effective learning-centered assessments align with specific learning objectives and provide clear guidelines and evaluative criteria for students. Students need to know what they're being evaluated on, or they're not going to perform well. Designing learner-centered assessments empowers students to take ownership of their learning, foster a growth mindset, and support lifelong learning skills. Here is my resource page, and I hope you enjoyed my presentation. Thank you.